Marcus Thompson had been running for 3 days straight. His clothes were torn, his face covered in dirt and sweat, and his stomach growled with hunger. The police sirens seemed to follow him everywhere he went in the small town of Millfield. He wasn't a career criminal, just a man who made one terrible mistake that changed everything. 3 months earlier, Marcus had been a regular construction worker with a wife and 2 young children. He worked hard every day, came home tired but happy, and dreamed of saving enough money to buy his family a bigger house. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good. Everything changed when his daughter Emma got sick. Emma was only 7 years old when the doctors discovered she had a rare blood disease. The medical bills started piling up quickly. Marcus's insurance covered some costs, but not nearly enough. He watched his savings disappear within weeks. His wife Sarah worked double shifts at the diner, but it still wasn't enough. The hospital wanted payment, and they wanted it fast. Desperate times made Marcus consider desperate measures. He had never stolen anything in his life, not even a candy bar as a child. But watching his daughter grow weaker each day while knowing that money could save her life drove him to make a choice he never thought he would make. He decided to rob the First National Bank of Millfield. Marcus wasn't smart about crime because he wasn't a criminal. He walked into the bank on a Tuesday morning with an old hunting rifle his father had left him. His hands shook as he approached the counter. The teller, a young woman named Jessica, looked up at him with friendly eyes until she saw the gun. Her smile disappeared instantly, replaced by pure terror. The robbery lasted only 4 minutes, but those 4 minutes destroyed Marcus's life. He got away with $8,000, enough to pay for Emma's next treatment, but nowhere near enough to cure her completely. The security cameras captured his face clearly because he forgot to wear a mask. Within hours, his picture was on every news channel in the state. Marcus knew he had made a horrible mistake the moment he left the bank. The money felt heavy in his hands, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. He had become the thing he always taught his children never to be, a thief. But Emma needed the treatment, and he couldn't take back what he had already done. For 2 weeks, Marcus managed to stay hidden while Sarah used the money for Emma's treatment. The little girl started getting better, which gave Marcus hope that maybe his sacrifice would be worth it. But the police were getting closer every day. They questioned his neighbors, his co-workers, and even his family. Sarah knew what he had done, but she didn't turn him in. She understood why he did it, even if she couldn't forgive him for it. The break in the case came when someone recognized Marcus at a gas station on the outskirts of town. The station attendant called the police, and within minutes, squad cars surrounded the area. Marcus saw them coming and ran into the nearby woods. That's when his 3-day chase began. Now, exhausted and desperate, Marcus found himself near the town's most sacred place, St. Mary's Cathedral. The old church had stood in Millfield for over 100 years. Its tall spires reached toward the sky like hands in prayer. People came from all over the county to visit this church, especially on Sundays when Father Miguel held his famous sermons about forgiveness and redemption. Marcus had attended this church as a child with his grandmother. He remembered sitting in the wooden pews listening to stories about good people doing good things. He remembered learning that God forgave all sins if a person was truly sorry. As he looked at the church now, he wondered if there was any forgiveness left for someone like him. The cathedral had special guards during the day because of all the valuable religious artifacts inside. These weren't regular security guards, but members of the Sacred Guard, a group of volunteers who protected holy places throughout the region. They wore simple brown uniforms and were known for their dedication to peace and prayer. Thomas Rodriguez had been a member of the Sacred Guard for 15 years. He was a quiet man in his 50s who took his duties seriously. Thomas believed that protecting sacred places was more than just a job. It was a calling from God. He had seen many troubled people come to the cathedral seeking help, and he always tried to treat them with kindness and respect. On this particular morning, Thomas was making his usual rounds when he noticed a man approaching the cathedral. The man looked desperate and dangerous. His clothes were dirty, his hair was messy, and he kept looking over his shoulder as if someone was following him. Thomas recognized the look of a man running from something. As the man got closer, Thomas realized who he was looking at. Marcus. Thompson's face had been on the news for days. Every police officer in 3 counties was looking for him. Thomas felt his heart beat faster, but he didn't run or call for help immediately. Something about the way Marcus moved, the sadness in his eyes, made Thomas want to understand what was happening. Marcus saw Thomas watching him and knew he had been recognized. Panic filled his mind. He couldn't go to prison now, not when Emma still needed him. In a moment of desperation, Marcus pulled out the pistol he had taken from his house when he started running. It was his father's old service weapon from his time as a police officer, a bitter irony that wasn't lost on Marcus. Thomas saw the gun and instinctively stepped back, but he didn't run. Years of training and natural courage kept him calm. He raised his hand slowly, showing Marcus that he wasn't a threat. The 2 men stood facing each other in the shadow of the cathedral, one desperate and armed, the other scared but determined to do his duty. Neither man could have predicted what would happen next. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cathedral steps as Marcus pointed the pistol at Thomas. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from exhaustion and hunger. 3 days of running had taken everything out of him. His mind was cloudy, making it hard to think clearly about what he was doing. Thomas looked into Marcus's eyes and saw something unexpected. Instead of the cold stare of a hardened criminal, he saw the desperate look of a father pushed beyond his limits. Thomas had raised 4 children of his own and recognized the particular kind of pain that comes from watching your child suffer. "Please don't make me do this," Marcus whispered, his voice cracking. The gun wavered in his hands. "I just need to get inside. I need sanctuary." Thomas had heard about the ancient tradition of sanctuary in churches, where people could seek protection from the law. It wasn't legally recognized anymore, but the spiritual meaning still held power for many people. He could see that Marcus was grasping for any hope of salvation, even if it might not be real. "Son, pointing that gun at me isn't going to solve your problems," Thomas said softly. His voice carried the wisdom of a man who had lived through many difficult situations. "Why don't you tell me what's really going on here?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "You know who I am. You've seen the news. I'm a bank robber, a criminal. The police want to lock me up and throw away the key." His voice grew stronger as anger mixed with his desperation. "But my daughter is sick, and she needs me. I can't go to prison when she needs me." Thomas nodded, slowly. He had indeed seen the news reports about the bank robbery, but he had also heard the rest of the story. The local news had interviewed people who knew Marcus, and they all said the same thing. He was a good man who made a terrible choice because of impossible circumstances. "Emma Thompson," Thomas said quietly. 7 years old. Rare blood disease. The whole town has been praying for her. Marcus's eyes widened in surprise. He hadn't expected this stranger to know his daughter's name. The gun lowered slightly as confusion replaced some of his desperation. "You know about Emma?" "Everyone knows about Emma," Thomas replied. "Father Miguel has been leading prayers for her every Sunday. The congregation has been raising money to help with her medical bills. We've raised almost $20,000 so far." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. All this time he had been running, believing that he was alone in his struggle to save his daughter. He had convinced himself that nobody understood or cared about his family's situation. Learning that the entire community had been trying to help them made his crime feel even more shameful. "I didn't know," Marcus said, his voice barely audible. "Nobody told me. I thought we were alone." Thomas took a small step forward, careful not to make any sudden movements. "You weren't alone, son. You were never alone. But fear and pride can make us feel isolated even when we're surrounded by people who care about us." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of police sirens in the distance. Marcus's head snapped up and the gun rose again. His brief moment of hope disappeared, replaced by the familiar panic that had been driving him for days. "They're coming for me," Marcus said, backing toward the cathedral doors. "I won't let them take me. Not when Emma needs me." Thomas could see that Marcus was about to make another desperate choice. The man was cornered, armed, and not thinking clearly. This was exactly the kind of situation that ended in tragedy. Thomas knew he had to act fast. "Wait," Thomas said, holding up his hands. "Before you do anything else, let me show you something." Without waiting for permission, Thomas slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a small photograph. He held it out so Marcus could see it. The picture showed a young girl with bright eyes and a beautiful smile, clearly taken before illness had weakened her. "This is Emma's school photo from last year," Thomas explained. "Father Miguel keeps it on his desk. He shows it to everyone who donates money for her treatment. He tells them about the brave little girl who fights her sickness with a smile, and about her father, who loves her so much he's willing to do anything to save her." Marcus stared at the photograph, his eyes filling with tears. Seeing his daughter's face reminded him of why he had started this terrible journey. Everything he had done, every mistake he had made had been for her. But looking at her innocent smile made him realize how disappointed she would be if she knew what he had become. "She used to tell me I was her hero," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "What kind of hero points guns at innocent people?" Thomas saw his opportunity and took another careful step forward. "The kind of hero who makes mistakes, but still has time to make things right. The kind of hero who can choose to be better than his worst moment." The police sirens were getting closer. Marcus could probably hear radio chatter and the sound of multiple vehicles approaching the cathedral. Time was running out for both men. Whatever happened next would determine whether this story ended in tragedy or redemption. "I can't go to prison," Marcus repeated, but his voice lacked conviction now. "Emma needs me." "Emma needs her father to be alive and well," Thomas replied firmly. "She needs him to be someone she can still be proud of when she gets better. And she will get better, Marcus. The whole community is working to make sure of that." Marcus looked around desperately. The cathedral doors were only a few feet behind him. Inside was temporary sanctuary, but he knew the police would eventually get him anyway. Ahead of him was Thomas, a good man he was threatening with a weapon. Behind him in the distance were the police, getting closer by the minute. For the first time in days, Marcus tried to think clearly about his options. Running hadn't worked. Hiding hadn't worked. Violence wouldn't work either. Maybe it was time to try something different. Maybe it was time to trust in the goodness of people instead of assuming the worst. "What happens if I put the gun down?" Marcus asked. Thomas smiled for the first time since the confrontation began. "Then we find out together what grace looks like in real life." The weight of the gun in Marcus's hand suddenly felt unbearable. Not because it was heavy, but because of what it represented. 3 days ago he had been a father trying to save his daughter. Now he was a man threatening an innocent person, who was only trying to help. The transformation horrified him. Thomas watched as internal struggle played out across Marcus's face. He had seen this moment before in other desperate people who came to the cathedral seeking help. It was the moment when someone had to choose between continuing down a dark path or finding the courage to step toward the light. "My grandfather used to say that every man gets tested," Thomas said quietly, keeping his voice calm and steady. "Not by easy times, but by impossible times. The test isn't whether you fall down. The test is what you do after you fall." Marcus looked at the photograph of Emma still in Thomas's outstretched hand. His daughter's smile seemed to shine even brighter in the morning sunlight. He remembered the day that picture was taken. Emma had been so excited about school photos that she woke up early to practice her smile in the mirror. She wanted to look perfect for Daddy. She practiced that smile for an hour, Marcus said, a sad laugh escaping his lips. She wanted to make sure Daddy would be proud when he saw the picture. "She succeeded," Thomas replied. "Anyone who sees this photo can tell immediately that this is a little girl who is deeply loved." The police sirens were very close now. Marcus could see the first patrol car turning the corner at the end of the street. Soon the entire area would be surrounded. His window for escape was closing rapidly, but strangely, the panic he had felt for days was starting to fade. "They're going to arrest me," Marcus said, but he sounded more resigned than afraid. "Yes, they probably will," Thomas agreed. "But that doesn't have to be the end of your story. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to us becomes the beginning, of something better. Marcus had never thought about prison as a beginning. In his mind, it was an ending, the end of his freedom, the end of his ability to help Emma, the end of his family's happiness. But Thomas seemed to see something different in the situation. "How can prison be a beginning?" Marcus asked. Thomas smiled gently. "Because sometimes we have to lose everything we think we need before we can discover what we actually need. And sometimes the people we meet in our darkest moments become the ones who help us find our way back to the light." The first police car pulled up to the cathedral, followed quickly by two more. Officers stepped out carefully, their hands on their weapons but not drawing them yet. Marcus could see them assessing the situation, trying to understand what was happening between him and Thomas. Detective Sarah Chen was the first officer to approach. She was a 20-year veteran who had handled hundreds of dangerous situations. She could see that Marcus was armed, but she also noticed that he wasn't pointing the weapon at Thomas anymore. Instead, both men seemed to be having a conversation. "Mr. Thompson," Detective Chen called out, her voice firm but not aggressive. "I'm Detective Chen. I've been looking for you for 3 days. Are you hurt? Is anyone hurt?" Marcus looked at her with surprise. He had expected the police to immediately demand his surrender or start shouting orders. Instead, the detective seemed genuinely concerned about his welfare. "Nobody's hurt," Marcus called back. "This man, Thomas, he's been helping me understand some things." Thomas turned slightly toward the detective while keeping his attention primarily on Marcus. "Detective, this man needs medical attention and food. He's been running for days and he's exhausted. He's not thinking clearly." Detective Chen had read Marcus's file thoroughly. She knew about Emma's illness and the medical bills that had driven him to rob the bank. She also knew that he had no prior criminal record and that everyone who knew him described him as a good man in an impossible situation. "Mr. Thompson, I know about your daughter," Detective Chen said. "I know why you did what you did. I'm not saying it was right, but I understand why you felt you had no choice." Marcus was stunned. He had expected judgment and condemnation from the police. Instead, he was hearing something that sounded almost like compassion. The gun in his hands felt more ridiculous with each passing moment. Thomas saw his opportunity. "Marcus, these people aren't your enemies. They're part of your community. They want to help you and Emma just like everyone else does." "But I robbed a bank," Marcus protested. "I threatened people. I broke the law." "Yes, you did," Detective Chen agreed. "And there will be consequences for that. But consequences don't have to mean the end of hope. They can also mean the beginning of making things right." Marcus looked around at the scene surrounding him. Police officers, their weapons ready but not drawn. Thomas standing calmly nearby, still holding Emma's photograph. The cathedral behind him representing centuries of people seeking forgiveness and redemption. For the first time in days, he didn't feel completely alone. "What happens to Emma?" "If I go to prison?" Marcus asked. Thomas and Detective Chen exchanged a quick glance. This was the question they both knew would be the key to resolving the situation peacefully. "The community fund for Emma's treatment is growing every day," Thomas said. "Father Miguel has contacted hospitals in 3 states to find the best possible care for her. She's not going to suffer because of your mistakes." Detective Chen nodded. "And there are programs that allow inmates to maintain contact with their families, especially in medical situations. Prison doesn't mean you disappear from Emma's life." Marcus felt the last of his resistance crumbling. The gun in his hands no longer felt like a solution to his problems. Instead, it felt like the symbol of everything that had gone wrong. He looked at Thomas, this stranger who had shown him more kindness in 10 minutes than he had shown himself in 3 days. "If I surrender now, will you promise me something?" Marcus asked. "If I can," Thomas replied. "Will you make sure Emma knows that everything I did because I love her, even the terrible things?" Thomas nodded solemnly. "She already knows that, son. A father's love isn't diminished by his mistakes. It's proven by his willingness to make things right." Marcus took a deep breath and looked at the gun in his hands one last time. Then, slowly and carefully, he bent down and placed it on the ground. As he straightened up, he felt lighter than he had in months. Not because his Problems were solved, but because he had finally stopped running from them. "I'm ready," he said simply. The moment Marcus placed the gun on the ground, everything changed. Detective Chen approached slowly, her hands visible and non-threatening. She kicked the weapon safely away before kneeling down to Marcus's level. Up close, she could see just how exhausted and malnourished he looked. "When did you last eat?" she asked, genuine concern in her voice. Marcus had to think about it. Time had blurred together during his 3 days on the run. "Monday, I think. Maybe Tuesday. I don't remember." Detective Chen immediately called for an ambulance. "Mr. Thompson, you need medical attention before we do anything else. You're dehydrated and probably suffering from exhaustion." Thomas watched as the other police officers secured the scene, but he noticed something remarkable happening. Instead of treating Marcus like a dangerous criminal, they were treating him like a person in need of help. Officers brought water and a blanket from their cars. One young officer even offered Marcus a sandwich from his lunch. "This isn't how I expected this to go," Marcus admitted as he gratefully accepted the water. "What did you expect?" Detective Chen asked. Marcus shrugged. "I thought you'd tackle me, handcuff me, throw me in the back of a car. I thought you'd be angry." Detective Chen sat down on the cathedral steps beside him. "We are here to enforce the law, but we're also human beings. We can see that you're a man who made a desperate choice, not a career criminal who enjoys hurting people." Thomas sat down on Marcus's other side. For a moment, the three of them looked like friends having a casual conversation, rather than a hostage situation that had just been resolved. "There's something else you should know," Thomas said to Marcus. "The bank teller you scared during the robbery, Jessica Martinez, she's been asking about you." Marcus's face went pale. "Oh God, is she okay? Did I traumatize her? I never meant to hurt anyone." "She's okay," Detective Chen assured him. "But Thomas is right. She has been asking about you. She wanted to know if you were hurt, if you were getting help." Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. "She should hate me. I pointed a gun at her. I terrified her." Thomas smiled. "Jessica is a member of our congregation. She's also a mother of 2 young children. When she learned about Emma's illness, she understood why you did what you did. She doesn't excuse it, but she understands it." The ambulance arrived, and paramedics began checking Marcus's vital signs. His blood pressure was low, and he was definitely dehydrated, but nothing that couldn't be treated with fluids and rest. They started an IV and began the process of stabilizing him. Detective Chen used the time to make some phone calls. She contacted the prosecutor's office to discuss Marcus's case. She also called social services to make sure Emma's care wouldn't be interrupted during the legal proceedings. "Detective," Thomas said quietly, "there's something the community would like to do, if it's possible." "What's that?" "We'd like to organize a legal defense fund for Marcus. Father Miguel has been talking to some lawyers in the city. They think that given the circumstances, Marcus might be able to negotiate a reduced sentence." Marcus overheard the conversation and looked up from where the paramedics were working on him. "I don't deserve help from the community. I robbed a bank. I threatened innocent people." An elderly woman approached the group. She had been watching from across the street and had finally worked up the courage to come over. Marcus recognized her as Mrs. Patterson, who lived 2 houses down from his family. "Marcus Thompson, you listen to me," Mrs. Patterson said firmly, pointing a finger at him. "You made a terrible mistake, but you're not a terrible person. We've watched you help neighbors, shovel snow from sidewalks, and work 2 jobs to support your family. One bad day doesn't erase years of good living." More people began arriving as word spread through the town. Marcus's co-workers from the construction company came, still wearing their hard hats and work boots. Parents from Emma's school showed up. Even Mr. Henderson from the grocery store where Marcus shopped came to see what was happening. Sarah, Marcus's wife, arrived with their son Jake. She had heard about the standoff on the radio and driven as fast as she could to the cathedral. When she saw Marcus sitting on the steps with an IV in his arm, she broke down crying. "I'm so sorry," Marcus said as she hugged him. "I'm so sorry for everything." "I know why you did it," Sarah whispered. "I just wish you had talked to me first. We could have found another way." Jake, who was only 10 years old, looked confused by everything happening around him. He didn't understand why his father was surrounded by police cars and why his mother was crying. All he knew was that Daddy looked sick and scared. "Is Daddy in trouble?" Jake asked Detective Chen. The detective knelt down to Jake's level. "Your daddy made some bad choices because he was scared about Emma being sick. Now he has to face the consequences of those choices. But that doesn't mean he's a bad person or that he doesn't love you and Emma very much." Father Miguel arrived and immediately went to Marcus. The priest had been counseling families in crisis for over 30 years, and he knew exactly what to say. "My son, I've been praying for you every day since this started, not just for your safety, but for your soul. I can see in your eyes that you've been carrying a terrible burden." Marcus looked at the priest with tears in his eyes. "I don't know how to make this right, Father. I've ruined everything." "Nothing is ruined that can't be rebuilt," Father Miguel replied. "The question now is whether you're ready to do the hard work of rebuilding." Detective Chen approached the group. "Mr. Thompson, the paramedics say you're stable enough to be transported. We need to take you to the hospital first, then to the jail for processing. But I want you to know that the prosecutor is willing to consider the circumstances of your case. There may be opportunities for plea negotiations." Marcus nodded, understanding that his legal troubles were just beginning. But for the first time, since he walked into that bank, he felt like he might have a chance at redemption. As the paramedics prepared to load him into the ambulance, Marcus looked around at all the faces surrounding him. His family, his neighbors, his co-workers, people from his church, even the police officers and paramedics treating him with dignity and respect. "I thought I was alone," he said to Thomas. "I thought nobody cared about Emma except us." Thomas shook his head. "You were never alone, Marcus. Sometimes when we're in pain, we just can't see the help that's right in front of us." As the ambulance drove away, Marcus realized that his story was far from over. In fact, in some ways, it was just beginning. 3 months after his surrender at the cathedral, Marcus sat in a small conference room at the county courthouse. His lawyer, David Martinez, was a young public defender who had taken on Marcus's case pro bono after hearing about the circumstances. Across the table sat District Attorney Rebecca Foster, a woman known for being tough but fair. "The community support for Mr. Thompson has been unprecedented," David said, sliding a thick folder across the table. "We have over 300 letters, from residents vouching for his character. The bank teller he robbed has written a letter asking for leniency. Even the bank manager supports a reduced sentence." District Attorney Foster opened the folder and began reading through some of the letters. She had been prosecuting criminals for 15 years, but she had never seen anything like this. Usually, communities wanted tougher sentences for bank robbers, not lighter ones. "Mr. Thompson," she said, looking directly at Marcus, "these letters paint a picture of a man who made one terrible decision in an otherwise exemplary life. But you still robbed a bank. You terrorized innocent people. I can't just ignore that." Marcus nodded. He had spent months thinking about what he had done, and he understood that his good intentions didn't erase the harm he had caused. "I know, ma'am. I don't expect to walk away without consequences. I just hope that whatever happens, I can still be part of my daughter's life." The mention of Emma brought a slight softening to the district attorney's expression. Her own daughter was 8 years old, just a year older than Emma. The thought of watching her child suffer while being unable to help was something that kept her awake at night. "How is Emma doing?" she asked. Marcus's face lit up for the first time during the meeting. "She's getting better. The community raised enough money for her to get treatment at Children's Hospital in the city. The doctors say her prognosis is very good now." This was the part of the story that had captured the entire town's attention. While Marcus was awaiting trial, the community had rallied around his family in an extraordinary way. The fundraising effort that had started in Father Miguel's church had grown into a county-wide campaign. Local businesses donated money, school children held bake sales, and even neighboring towns contributed to Emma's medical fund. "The irony is heartbreaking," David said. "If Mr. Thompson had waited just a few more weeks, the community would have raised enough money to cover Emma's treatment without him ever needing to consider crime. But I didn't know that," Marcus added quietly. I felt so isolated, so desperate. I couldn't see past my fear for Emma. District Attorney Foster had been considering her options for weeks. The case had attracted statewide media attention, and everyone was watching to see how she would handle it. She could pursue the maximum sentence and appear tough on crime, or she could show mercy and risk being seen as soft on bank robbery. "Mr. Thompson, I'm prepared to offer you a deal," she said finally. "Plead guilty to armed robbery and aggravated assault. Serve 18 months in minimum security prison, followed by 3 years of probation. You'll also be required to perform 500 hours of community service and undergo counseling." Marcus and his lawyer exchanged glances. They had hoped for a lighter sentence, but this was far better than the 10 years Marcus could have faced if convicted at trial. "There's one more condition," the district attorney continued. "I want you to speak to community groups about your experience. Help people understand what desperation can lead to, and encourage them to seek help before they make the kinds of choices you made." Marcus agreed immediately. If his story could prevent even one person from making his mistakes, then something good could come from all the pain he had caused. The plea agreement was formalized the following week. Marcus was sentenced exactly as the district attorney had proposed. As he was led away to begin his prison term, he looked back at the packed courtroom. Sarah and Jake were there, along with Emma, who was looking healthier than she had in months. Thomas was there, wearing his Sacred Guard uniform. Father Miguel sat in the front row along with dozens of other community members who had supported Marcus's family. Prison was nothing like what Marcus had expected. Because of his non-violent history and the circumstances of his crime, he was placed in a minimum security facility that focused on rehabilitation rather than punishment. He shared a room with Robert, a man in his 60s who had been convicted of embezzlement after his small business failed. "The hardest part isn't the confinement," Robert told Marcus during his first week. "It's the guilt, the knowledge that you hurt people who trusted you." Marcus understood exactly what Robert meant. The guilt was a constant weight on his chest, making it hard to breathe sometimes. But he was determined to use his time in prison constructively. He enrolled in every educational program available, earning his GED and starting college courses. He also joined a group for inmates dealing with family crises. Every week, Sarah brought the children to visit. Emma's health continued to improve, and she started asking when Daddy would come home. Jake had initially been angry with his father, but gradually began to understand that people could make terrible mistakes and still be good people. "Daddy, Mrs. Patterson says you're famous now," Emma said during one visit, her eyes bright with excitement. Marcus laughed. "I don't think famous is the right word, sweetheart. She says people from other towns come to our church to hear about what happened. Father Miguel tells them about how you made a mistake but how the whole town helped fix it." This was true. Marcus's story had indeed become famous, but not in the way he might have expected. It had become a story about community compassion, about how people could choose mercy over judgment. Other towns were using it as an example of how to support families in crisis before they reached the breaking point. Thomas visited Marcus regularly, even though they had only known each other for those brief moments at the cathedral. Their unlikely friendship had deepened through letters and conversations. "You changed me too, you know," Thomas told Marcus during one visit. "Seeing how desperate you were, how much you loved your daughter, it reminded me why I became a Sacred Guard in the first place. It's not just about protecting buildings, it's about protecting people's faith in goodness." 6 months into his sentence, Marcus received a letter that changed everything. It was from Jessica Martinez, the bank teller he had robbed. She had written to him several times, but this letter was different. "Dear Marcus," the letter began, "I wanted you to know that I've started a program at the bank to help families facing medical crises. We call it Emma's Fund, and it provides emergency loans and grants to people who are struggling with medical bills. So far, we've helped 12 families avoid the desperation you felt. I thought you should know that your story is still helping people." Marcus read the letter 3 times before he could see clearly through his tears. Somehow, his worst moment was being transformed into something that helped others. It didn't undo the pain he had caused, but it gave new meaning to his suffering. As his release date approached, Marcus began to prepare for the most challenging part of his journey. rebuilding his life and proving that he deserved the second chance his community had given him. Marcus walked out of Millfield County Prison on a crisp October morning, carrying only a small bag of belongings and a heart full of both hope and anxiety. 18 months had passed since he pointed that gun at Thomas Rodriguez. 18 months that had transformed him in ways he never could have imagined. Sarah was waiting for him in the parking lot, along with Emma and Jake. Emma, now 9 years old, ran toward him with the boundless energy of a completely healthy child. The little girl who had once been too weak to play was now tall and strong, her cheeks pink with life. "Daddy!" Emma shouted as she threw herself into his arms. Marcus lifted her up, amazed at how much heavier she felt. It was the weight of health, of life restored. Jake hung back slightly, still processing his complicated feelings about his father's absence. At 12 years old, he understood more about what had happened than Emma did, and forgiveness came harder, for him. Marcus saw the hesitation in his son's eyes and felt a familiar pang of guilt. "Hey, buddy," Marcus said softly, setting Emma down and approaching Jake carefully. "I know I have a lot to make up for." Jake nodded but stepped forward to hug his father. It wasn't the enthusiastic embrace Emma had given, but it was a start. "I'm glad you're home, Dad. I just need time." Sarah watched the reunion with tears in her eyes. She had held their family together during the most difficult period of their lives, working extra shifts at the diner while managing Emma's medical appointments and helping Jake deal with his anger and confusion. She had aged in the past year and a half, but there was a strength in her now that hadn't been there before. "Welcome home," she said simply, kissing Marcus gently on the cheek. The drive home was filled with chatter about everything that had changed in Millfield during Marcus's absence. Emma told him about her new friends at school, how she had joined the soccer team and how she won the spelling bee last spring. Jake shared updates about his middle school classes and his growing interest in computers. When they pulled into the driveway of their small house, Marcus was surprised to see several cars parked along the street. As they walked to the front door, people began emerging from the vehicles. Thomas Rodriguez was there, wearing civilian clothes but still carrying himself with the dignified bearing Marcus remembered. Father Miguel stood beside him, smiling warmly. Mrs. Patterson was there with a casserole dish, as were several of Marcus's former co-workers. "Welcome home, son," Thomas said, extending his hand. The two men shook hands and then embraced, an unlikely friendship that had been forged in crisis and strengthened through correspondence. "I didn't expect a crowd," Marcus said, feeling overwhelmed by the support. "This town doesn't forget the people it cares about," Father Miguel replied. "We've been waiting for you to come home so we can properly welcome you back into the community." Over the next few hours, Marcus learned about all the changes that had occurred during his absence. Emma's fund at the bank had grown into a regional program, helping dozens of families avoid the desperate choices that had led to Marcus's crime. The Sacred Guard had expanded their community outreach, with Thomas leading workshops on crisis intervention and conflict resolution. Most importantly, Emma's medical team had declared her to be in complete remission. The experimental treatment funded by the community donations had been successful beyond anyone's hopes. She would need regular checkups for years to come, but her doctors were confident that she would live a normal, healthy life. "All of this happened because of what you went through," Thomas told Marcus as they sat on the front porch later that evening. "Your crisis became a catalyst for our community to become better, more compassionate, more aware of when our neighbors need help." Marcus shook his head. "I don't want to take credit for good things that happened after I did something terrible." "I'm not asking you to take credit," Thomas replied. "I'm asking you to accept that God can use our mistakes for good, even when we can't see how." The next challenge was finding work. Having a felony conviction made employment difficult, even with community support. Marcus spent weeks applying for jobs, facing rejection after rejection. Some employers were sympathetic, but couldn't risk hiring someone with a criminal record. Others were less kind, making Marcus feel like he would be forever defined by his worst moment. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. David Chen, Detective Chen's husband, owned a small construction company that specialized in renovation projects for churches and community centers. He had followed Marcus's story through his wife and had been impressed by the letters of support from Marcus's former co-workers. "I need someone who understands that building isn't just about construction," David explained during their interview. "It's about creating spaces where people can find hope and healing. I think you understand that better than most." Marcus started work immediately, grateful for the opportunity, but determined to prove he deserved it. His first project was renovating the community room at St. Mary's Cathedral, the same church where he had surrendered to police. Working in that space every day was both humbling and healing. 6 months after his release, Marcus received a letter from Jessica Martinez at the bank. She was writing to invite him to speak at a conference for financial institutions about recognizing and responding to families in crisis. The conference was being held in the state capitol, and several hundred banking professionals would attend. "I don't know if I'm ready for something that big," Marcus told Sarah. "You've been speaking to church groups and community organizations for months," she reminded him. "You've helped people understand that desperation can lead good people to make bad choices. This is just a bigger audience." The conference was intimidating. Marcus had never spoken to so many people in business suits, people who managed the very institutions he had once seen as enemies. But as he told his story, he saw recognition in their faces. These were people who had seen firsthand the desperation that led to financial crimes. "The tragedy isn't that I robbed a bank," Marcus said during his presentation. "The tragedy is that I felt so isolated and hopeless that I couldn't see any other options. If just one person in my community had reached out to ask if our family needed help, if I had known about the resources that existed, if I had understood that my neighbors cared about Emma's situation, I never would have walked into that bank with a gun." After his speech, several bank executives approached Marcus with questions and ideas. Within a year, Emma's Fund had been implemented in banks across 3 states, providing emergency assistance to families facing medical crises. 2 years after his release from prison, Marcus stood once again on the steps of St. Mary's Cathedral. This time, he wasn't running from the police or pointing a gun at anyone. He was there for Emma's confirmation ceremony, watching his daughter, now 11 and completely healthy, promise to live according to her faith's principles. Thomas Rodriguez was there too in his Sacred Guard uniform, standing proudly as Emma received her confirmation. Their friendship had become one of the most important relationships in Marcus's life, a constant reminder that people could choose compassion over judgment. Father Miguel performed the ceremony, and during his sermon he spoke about redemption and second chances. He didn't mention Marcus by name, but everyone in the congregation knew he was talking about the man who had once been their community's most wanted criminal and had become one of their most valued members. "Grace," Father Miguel said, "is not about forgetting the mistakes we've made. Grace is about discovering that our mistakes don't have to define us. Grace is about finding out that our worst moments can become the foundation for our best selves." After the ceremony, Marcus found himself standing in the exact spot where he had pointed that gun at Thomas Rodriguez years earlier. Emma ran up to him, still wearing her white confirmation dress, and hugged him tightly. "Daddy, Mrs. Martinez from the bank told me that you help other families now because of what happened to us. Is that true?" Marcus looked down at his daughter, this miracle child who had inspired both his worst and best moments. "Yes, sweetheart. Sometimes when bad things happen, we can learn from them and help other people avoid the same mistakes." Emma smiled, the same bright smile from her school photograph that Thomas had shown him years ago. "So something good came from when you were sick in your heart?" Marcus was surprised by her description. She was right. He had been sick in his heart, sick with fear and desperation and isolation. But communities could heal hearts just as surely as hospitals could heal bodies. "Yes, Emma. Something very good came from it." As the sun set over Millfield, Marcus realized that his story had come full circle. He was no longer a wanted man running from his mistakes. He was a man who had faced his failures, accepted the consequences, and discovered that redemption was not only possible, but could benefit entire communities. The pistol he had pointed at Thomas Rodriguez that day had been intended as a weapon. Instead, It had become a tool that opened hearts, changed lives, and proved that even in our darkest moments we are never as alone as we think we are. Sometimes the people we least expect to help us become the ones who save us from ourselves. Marcus Thompson was finally home, not just in his house, but in his community and in his own heart.